Okay, so, I've told this story maybe 3 times in my entire life. Once to a police officer who looked at me like I was insane. Once to a therapist who tried to medicalize it. And once to my wife, Sarah, on our 10th anniversary, when we were both drunk enough on expensive wine to finally talk about it. We haven't mentioned it since. But the story has a way of bubbling up. It's a permanent part of my mental landscape now. Like a dark mountain range on the horizon that I can never quite reach but can always see. And lately, for reasons I can't explain, it's been feeling closer than usual. So, I'm going to tell it one more time. Just to get it out. You can choose to believe it or not. Honestly, most days, I'm still not sure I do. This all happened back in the fall of 2017. Sarah and I were in that classic newlywed phase. Broke, optimistic, and ridiculously in love. I'd just been laid off from a cushy graphic design job. The whole department was restructured, and Sarah was working a low-paying but fulfilling job at a nonprofit. Our fancy, overpriced one-bedroom apartment was suddenly a financial guillotine hanging over our heads. We needed to downsize, and we needed to do it fast. Finding a cheap apartment in the city that isn't a literal shoebox with a rat problem is a Herculean task. We spent weeks scouring listings, visiting depressing, water-stained basements and third-floor walk-ups that smelled of old grease and despair. We were on the verge of giving up, of packing our bags and moving back in with my parents. Which felt like the ultimate failure. And then we found the Bedford. It was on one of those forgotten side streets, sandwiched between a wholesale fabric warehouse and a defunct printing press. The building itself was an old pre-war brick construction, probably from the 40s or 50s. With a certain stoic, unadorned charm. The listing was almost too good to be true. A spacious one-bedroom. Hardwood floors, big windows, utilities included, for a price that was frankly suspicious. It was almost 40% cheaper than any comparable place we'd seen. What's the catch? Sarah whispered to me as we stood outside, staring up at it. The street was unnaturally quiet for a weekday afternoon. No cars, no pedestrians. The only sound was the distant hum of city traffic. A whole world away. Maybe it's haunted, I joked, and Sarah punched my arm. A little too hard. The stress was getting to her. The building manager, a man named Mr. Gable, met us at the door. He was a tall, skeletal man who seemed to be made entirely of sharp angles and loose gray skin. He wore a tweed jacket that was probably older than I was. And his smile didn't quite reach his pale, watery eyes, but he was polite, professional even. He spoke in a low, almost whispery voice, as if he didn't want to disturb the air around him. The lobby was clean, if dated, with dark wood paneling and brass fixtures that had been polished to a dull sheen. The air inside felt thick, heavy, and silent. That was the first thing I truly noticed. It wasn't just quiet, it was a profound, vacuum-sealed silence that seemed to press in on you, muffling the sound of your own breathing. I remember clearing my throat, and the sound felt like a gunshot in a library. Mr. Gable's eyes flickered towards me for a second, and his smile tightened. He showed us the apartment on the 4th floor, 4B, and it was perfect, genuinely perfect. The floors didn't even creak. Sunlight streamed through the large, clean windows, illuminating little dust motes dancing in the air. The kitchen was small but functional. The bathroom had old but clean tilework. It felt solid, safe. It's really quiet, Sarah remarked, her voice also a near whisper, as if the building itself demanded it. We have a very respectful community here, Mr. Gable said, his voice smooth as silk. Many of our residents work odd hours, nurses, artists, night shift workers. A peaceful environment is our highest priority. It made sense. We were desperate. The price was right. We took it. We signed the lease that day, paid the deposit, and felt a tidal wave of relief wash over us. We had a home. The first week was a honeymoon period. We moved our meager belongings in, spent hours assembling IKEA furniture, and ordered pizza to eat on the floor. The silence was a novelty, a welcome respite from the sirens and street noise of our old place. We'd joke about it. Welcome to the library, I'd say when I came home from a job interview. Shish, Sarah would whisper back, a playful glint in her eye. This is what I mean by establishing a baseline of safety. We felt good there. We were building a life. The darkness hadn't seeped in yet, it was just pooling in the corners. Waiting. The first red flag, as they say, wasn't a flag at all. It was a post-it note. We had ordered a package, a new coffee maker, and it hadn't arrived. I went down to the lobby to see if it had been left there. Standing by the mailboxes was an elderly woman, probably in her 80s, with a kind, wrinkled face. She was our next door neighbor in 4A. I'd seen her a couple of times, always in the hallway, always scurrying quickly into her apartment if she saw us coming. "Excuse me," I said, offering my friendliest smile. "Hi, I'm Alex from 4B. You haven't seen a package from Amazon, have you?" She looked up at me, and her eyes went wide with something I couldn't place. It wasn't just surprise, it was genuine, stark fear. Her hands, which were fumbling with her keys, started to tremble. She didn't say a word. Instead, she shook her head frantically, her mouth a thin, tight line. Then she jammed her key into the lock, opened her door just enough to slip through, and shut it behind her with a soft, final click. I stood there for a moment, confused. It was weird, really weird. I'm a pretty non-threatening guy. Maybe she was hard of hearing? Or had social anxiety? I rationalized it, because that's what you do. You find the logical explanation because the alternative is too uncomfortable to consider. Later that evening, there was a soft rustling sound at our door. I opened it to find no one there, but stuck to the wood was a yellow post-it note. In neat, slightly shaky cursive, it said, "Packages are sometimes left in the laundry room. 4A. I showed it to Sarah. "Huh," she said, her brow furrowed. "Why didn't she just tell you that?" "I don't know," I said, a little unsettled. "Maybe she's mute?" That became our working theory. Our neighbor was mute. It explained her reaction. The note, everything. But then we started noticing it with everyone. The young guy in 4C, who looked like a student, would give us a quick, tight-lipped smile in the hall and then practically sprint to the elevator. The couple on the third floor, who we saw carrying in groceries, just nodded when Sarah said, "Hello," their eyes fixed on the floor. No one spoke, ever. It was a building full of ghosts who hadn't yet realized they were dead. All communication, we discovered, was done via notes. A notice about a water shut-off from Mr. Gable would appear under our door. A complaint about our TV being a little too loud one night, we were watching an action movie, appeared on our door the next morning. "Please be mindful of the noise after 10 p.m. Thank you." There was no signature. It was strange. It was a collective eccentricity that we just couldn't wrap our heads around. But again, the rent was cheap, the apartment was nice, and we were busy. It was easy to just accept it. This is the weird, silent building. Okay, it became our own private joke. But the humor was starting to feel strained. The slow burn began in earnest about a month in. And it started, as these things so often do, in the middle of the night. Sarah was the first to hear it. She woke me up around 3 a.m., her hand gripping my shoulder. "Alex," she whispered, her voice tight with panic. "Listen." I sat up, groggy and disoriented. The room was bathed in the pale, orange glow of the city lights outside. All I could hear was the faint hum of the refrigerator. "Listen to what?" "I don't hear anything." "Shush, just listen." And then I heard it. A sound from the apartment above us. 5B. It was a muffled, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. It was heavy, and it was slow. It sounded, for lack of a better word, like someone was tenderizing a very large piece of meat on the floor. Thump, thump, thump. It went on for maybe a minute. And then it stopped. The silence that rushed back in to fill the void was somehow more terrifying than the noise had been. "What the hell was that?" I whispered. "I don't know," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "It's the third time I've heard it this week." I tried to rationalize it. It's an old building. It's probably just the pipes. Or someone working out at a weird hour. But I didn't believe it. The sound had a weight, a density, that pipes just don't have. It felt organic. It felt wrong. A few nights later, a new sound joined the chorus. After the thumping, we heard something else. A long, drawn-out scraping noise. It sounded exactly like a heavy piece of furniture, a bookshelf, or a dresser, being dragged across a bare wood floor. But it was slow, agonizingly slow, and it always came after the thumping. Every time it happened, we'd lie there in the dark, frozen, our bodies rigid with tension. We were too scared to even whisper to each other. We'd just listen, as the sound echoed down through the ceiling. A nightly ritual that we were unwilling participants in. The thumping, then a pause, then the dragging. It was always the same. Sarah started to unravel. She was a light sleeper to begin with, and now she was barely sleeping at all. She had dark circles under her eyes. She'd jump at the slightest noise during the day. She was convinced someone was being hurt in the apartment upstairs. We have to do something. Alex, she pleaded with me one morning after a particularly bad night. We have to call the police. And tell them what? I said, trying to be the voice of reason. But my own conviction was wavering. That we heard thumping? They'll think we're crazy. There's no proof. So we just lie there and listen to it? What if someone is in trouble? Her fear was contagious. I was scared, too. The atmosphere in the building, which had once felt peacefully quiet, now felt menacingly silent. The polite, nonverbal nods from our neighbors started to look less like eccentricity and more like a shared, unspoken terror. Their eyes, I realized, were always darting around, never resting, as if they were constantly on the lookout for something. That night, we decided to act. We waited for the noises to start. Sure enough, around 2:45 a.m., the ritual began. Thump, thump, thump. My heart hammered against my ribs. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, flooded my veins. Sarah was already dialing 911 on her cell phone, her hand shaking so badly she could barely press the numbers. I'm going to go up there, I whispered, my voice sounding thin and reedy to my own ears. No, Alex, don't, Sarah hissed, grabbing my arm. I'm just going to listen at the door. Stay on the phone. I slipped out of our apartment into the hallway. The silence out here was even more profound. The air was cold, stagnant. I crept up the stairs to the 5th floor, each step a thunderous creak in the oppressive quiet. I reached the door of 5B. I pressed my ear against the cold, painted wood. For a moment, I heard nothing. Then, the dragging sound started. It was louder up here, clearer, and I could hear something else, too. A faint, wet, ripping sound. My stomach turned. I felt a primal urge to run, to get back to my apartment, to lock the door and pretend none of this was happening. But I stayed. I had to know. I knelt down and looked through the mail slot. It was one of those old-fashioned brass ones, and it was just wide enough to give me a sliver of a view. The apartment was dark, except for a single, bare bulb hanging in what looked like the living area. The floor was covered in clear plastic sheeting, the kind painters use. It was glistening with something dark and wet, and in the center of the room, a man was bent over something on the floor. I couldn't see what it was. The man was large, heavy-set, his back to me. He was the one making the dragging sound, pulling a large, lumpy object wrapped in more of the same plastic sheeting. He dragged it a few feet, then stopped, breathing heavily. My blood ran cold. This was real. This was happening. I scrambled back from the door, my breath catching in my throat. I practically fell down the stairs, fumbled with my own lock, and burst back into our apartment. Sarah was off the phone, her face pale as a sheet. They're on their way, she whispered. They said to stay in the apartment. What did you see? I couldn't form the words. I just shook my head, my mind replaying that single, horrific image, the plastic sheeting, the dark liquid, the sheer, brutal reality of it. We waited. It was the longest 10 minutes of my life. Every creak of the building, every distant siren, sent a jolt of panic through me. Finally, we heard the heavy tread of boots on the stairs. We heard them knock on the door of 5B. Police, open up. The voice was loud, authoritative. It shattered the building's silence like a rock through a stained glass window. For the first time since we'd moved in, I felt a sliver of hope. We heard the door to 5B open. We heard the low murmur of voices. The police were in there for what felt like an eternity. 20 minutes, 30. Then, we heard them coming back down. There was a sharp, loud knock on our door. I opened it to find 2 uniformed officers. They did not look happy. Are you the ones who called in the disturbance? The older one asked, his eyes scanning our apartment. Me. Then Sarah. Yes, I said, my voice shaky. The noises. From upstairs. I looked through the mail slot. I saw You looked through your neighbor's mail slot? The younger officer cut in, an accusatory tone in his voice. I was worried. I saw plastic on the floor, and he was dragging something. Sir, the older officer said, sighing with practiced weariness, your neighbor is a sculptor. He works with clay and plaster. He was moving a new piece, an abstract form, which he had wrapped in plastic to keep the moisture in. The thumping you heard was him wedging clay. He works late because he has a day job. I stared at him, dumbfounded. A sculptor? But the smell. I suddenly remembered another detail. In the hallway, on the 5th floor, there had been a faint, acrid smell, like bleach. He cleans his studio with industrial chemicals to keep the dust down. The officer said, his patience clearly exhausted. Look, folks, it's 4 a.m. Your neighbor has been very understanding. But we've all had a long night. Please, try to be a little more considerate before calling us again. And with that, they turned and left. Humiliation washed over me, hot and sickening. A sculptor, of course. It was the perfect, logical explanation for everything. The thumping, the dragging, the plastic, the smell. We were the crazy ones. We were the paranoid new tenants in the weird, quiet building. Sarah just stood in the middle of the room, her arms wrapped around herself. She didn't say anything. The look on her face was one of complete and utter defeat. I had never felt like a bigger fool in my entire life. I had let the building's strangeness get to me, let it infect my mind until I saw horror where there was only art. The next morning, there was a post-it note on our door. I am so very sorry for the noise. It will not happen again. 5B. The apology felt like a final nail in the coffin of our credibility. We didn't talk about it. We couldn't. The shame was too great. Life returned to a new, more tense kind of normal. The noises from upstairs stopped completely. The building was more silent than ever. But the fear hadn't gone away. For me, it had just changed shape. It was no longer a fear of what was happening in 5B, but a fear of my own mind. Had I really seen what I thought I saw? Or had the stress and the oppressive atmosphere of the building cooked up a waking nightmare? Sarah, however, did not let it go. It wasn't clay. Alex, she'd say to me in a low voice when we were out of the apartment. Walking in a crowded park. The only place she seemed to feel safe. The way you described it. That wasn't an art project. Sarah, please, I'd beg. The police saw it. It's over. But it wasn't. She started her own quiet investigation. She'd spend hours online, searching for the building's address, the names of tenants, anything. Most of it was a dead end. But she did find something. A small, digitized newspaper article from a local paper from 2012. 5 years earlier, the headline was, Local Man Vanishes from Downtown Apartment. The man had lived at the Bedford. He had disappeared without a trace. His car was still in the parking lot. His wallet and keys were in his apartment. The police suspected he'd left on his own accord. But the family insisted he would never do that. The case was cold. The address was ours. This is it, Alex, she said, showing me the article on her laptop. This is a pattern. It's one guy. Sarah, 5 years ago. It could be a coincidence. Even as I said it, the words tasted like lies. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Sarah had been trying, against my advice, to be friendly with our next-door neighbor in 4A. The old woman. She left her a note asking if she needed any groceries. The next morning, the note was returned to us. Slipped under our door. At the bottom, our neighbor had written a single, shaky word. No. But that afternoon, as I was coming home, I saw the old woman in the hallway, talking to Mr. Gable. Except, she wasn't talking. Mr. Gable was. He was speaking to her in his usual low, silky voice, his face calm, his posture relaxed. But the woman was backed up against her door, her body rigid with terror. She was shaking her head, tears streaming down her face. Mr. Gable reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture that should have been comforting. But it looked possessive, threatening. He leaned in and whispered something in her ear. She flinched as if he'd struck her. Then he smiled, patted her shoulder, and walked away. He saw me at the end of the hall, gave me a polite nod, and disappeared down the stairs. The old woman scrambled into her apartment without even looking at me. I stood there, my grocery bags digging into my fingers. The image was burned into my brain. It wasn't a conversation. It was an interrogation, an intimidation. That night, I told Sarah she was right. Something was terribly wrong in this building. My skepticism, my rationalizations, they were all gone. All that was left was a cold, hard certainty that we were in danger. We decided to leave. We didn't have a plan. We didn't have a place to go. We just knew we had to get out. We would pack a bag with our essentials, laptops, documents, a few changes of clothes, and we would leave in the morning. Go to a motel, and figure it out from there. For the first time in weeks, we had a plan. We felt a flicker of control. It was the last time we would feel that way. We were packing, whispering frantically in the dark, throwing things into a duffel bag. We were being as quiet as possible. But in a silent building, every sound is amplified. I dropped my phone. It hit the hardwood floor with a loud, sharp clack. We both froze. The sound seemed to echo in the small apartment. We stood there, not breathing, listening. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't the building's usual heavy quiet. This was an active, listening silence. A predatory silence. It felt like every single person in that building had stopped what they were doing and was now listening. Listening for us. And then it came. A single, slow, deliberate knock on our door. Knock. It wasn't the police this time. It wasn't loud or demanding. It was soft, patient, confident. Sarah let out a tiny, strangled gasp. I put my finger to my lips, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. My mind was a white-hot panic. Who was it? What did they want? I crept to the door, my body trembling. The peephole. I had to look. I put my eye to the cool glass lens, my vision swimming. Standing in the hallway was Mr. Gable. He wasn't angry. He wasn't threatening. He was just standing there, perfectly still, in his old tweed jacket. And he was smiling. That same empty, placid smile. In one hand, he held a small, yellow post-it note. That was it. That was the moment. The culmination of all the small, creeping fears. He wasn't just the manager. He was the warden, the conductor of this silent orchestra. The thumping, the dragging, the disappearances, the notes, the fear, it all radiated from him. He was the sculptor. The man in 5B was probably just another terrified resident, forced to play a part in this sick theater. Just like the old woman in 4A. Just like everyone else. The police call hadn't exposed him, it had exposed us. We had broken the cardinal rule. We had made noise. We had tried to bring the outside world in. He knew we were in there. He knew we were looking at him. He didn't move. He just stood there, smiling, holding that note. A note that probably said something simple. Something polite. Is everything all right? Or maybe, please, be quiet. But we knew what it really meant. It meant, I know, and now, you will be silent, just like the rest of them. The fight or flight response is a real thing. It's not a metaphor. In that moment, my entire world narrowed to a single, screaming imperative. Run. The fire escape. I mouthed to Sarah. Our apartment had one, outside the bedroom window. We never used it. It was old, rusty. We backed away from the door, moving in slow motion, our eyes locked on it as if Mr. Gable could see us through the wood. We got to the bedroom. I struggled with the old window latch, my fingers slick with sweat. It finally gave way with a groan. Cold night air flooded the room. Another knock came. This time, a little harder. Knock, knock. I scrambled out onto the narrow, rickety metal platform. It swayed under my weight. Sarah was right behind me, her face a mask of pure terror. We didn't look down. We just started climbing down the ladder. My hand over her hand, rung by rusty rung. My heart was going to explode. Every sound, every scrape of our shoes on the metal, felt like a scream. When we reached the bottom, landing in the dark, trash-filled alley behind the building, we didn't stop. We ran. We ran without looking back. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs gave out. We didn't stop until the neon glow of a 24-hour convenience store offered a tiny island of light and life in the sleeping city. We called a taxi from there. We went to a motel on the far side of town and paid in cash. We locked the door, braced a chair against it, and huddled together on the bed, shaking. For the rest of the night, we never went back to the Bedford. We left everything, our furniture, our clothes, Our wedding photos. Our whole life. We called the police the next day from a payphone. I tried to tell the story. The whole story. To a tired-sounding detective. The silence. The notes. Mr. Gable. The man in 5B. The feeling of being watched. He listened, and I could hear him typing. But his questions were all wrong. So you abandoned your lease? Did Mr. Gable ever threaten you physically? Do you have any proof of these accusations? Proof. I had no proof. Just a collection of terrifying feelings and a story that sounded like a paranoid delusion. They sent a car to check on the building. The official report, which we got a copy of weeks later, stated that they spoke to the manager, Mr. Gable, and several tenants. Everyone was fine. The building was quiet and orderly. The tenants in 4B had apparently vanished in the middle of the night, breaking their lease. We were filed away as another urban transient story. To the rest of the world, we were the mystery. We moved 100 miles away. We started over, with nothing. For years, we were haunted. Every quiet room felt like the Bedford. Every knock on the door sent a jolt of fear through me. Sarah had nightmares for a long time. I developed a habit of checking the locks 3, 4, 5 times before going to bed. I still do. I don't know what happened to the old woman in 4A. I don't know who the man in 5B really was. I don't know how many people before that vanished man from 2012 had broken the silence. I don't know what Mr. Gable did to them when they did. The thumping and the dragging. I think I know, but I don't let my mind go there. The world is full of quiet, forgotten places, and you never really know what's going on behind the closed doors. We were lucky. We made a noise, and we were given a warning, and we were smart enough to listen to that warning and run. My only question, the one that keeps me up on the nights when the memory feels too close, is what was written on that final post-it note, the one Mr. Gable was holding as he smiled at us through the peephole. What final, polite, terrifying message did he have for us, right before he was planning to make us silent, too?